Hi guys. So when a lot of people think of Judaism, a lot of what the way that Jews are represented is often the extremely secular forms of Judaism, non-religious, and also many cultural things. So it really doesn't represent the religion and more represents the Jewish people, which encompasses um, many things other than religion. So Judaism is both a race and ethno-religious group. It is a faith. It is a monotheistic faith, the first of the Abrahamic religions, and it also has many cultural aspects to it and social. And uh, I saw my friend linked a video recently where someone was talking about sort of the geography of Jews historically, um, which was interesting. It was more or less accurate. He got a lot of pronunciations wrong, but the data was pretty good. Um, the one thing I would sort of disagree with is he really focused on this racial component, which is pretty. Jews do accept converts, so it's not really comparable to Zoroastrianism, or yeah, I guess just faiths which are really more race driven. I don't even really know what race is. Anyways, um, uh, but I wanted to talk more about mostly the religious aspects of it, but I'll probably talk about some cultural things as well. The book that all Jews follow is called the Tanakh, which is actually an acronym for Torah, which is also the first book of the Bible um, that Christians follow as well, the First Testament. Um, and it also stands for Nevi'im, which is, so Tanakh is like TNK, or the Hebrew letters are the Hebrew letters that make those sounds. Um, T for Torah, N for Nevi'im, which is prophets. Nevi is prophet, and Im is like is plural for Hebrew, so Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, which is writings. So really these three encompass the books that all Jews technically follow. Now, if you're, wow, how do I break this down? In addition to those books, there's many other books that are basically analyses of the Tanakh. The most famous of those is probably the Mishnah, the Talmud, the Tanya, the Zohar, the Midrashes, the Midrashim, which were oral, and the Torah itself actually was oral originally. And those are the main ones. So when we're speaking about Jews generally, just to get this out of the way, so like when people think about Jews generally, your typical Jew is going to be a person that is not aware of anything that I just said, maybe knows the word Torah, has not read the Torah, does not study the Torah or any of the interpretations of it, and does not follow Jewish law. That's your standard Jew. And Jews are becoming more and more secularized. So typically, if you meet someone who's Jewish, nothing that I say in this video will apply to them, unless I'm making a point to talk about that. Typically, what Jews will follow are next to nothing. They'll observe the most holy days in Judaism. Um, Not even. They'll observe two of the holy days, and then the one that's in close proximity to Christmas, and maybe a couple other ones that have uh, you know have sort of taken on a sort of like Western non-religious aspect to it. That's sort of what Jews will participate in. They will go to a shul or a synagogue, which is like a church, but most will not go regularly, and they will often pray in Hebrew or English, but those that do pray in Hebrew, most of them don't speak the language. So they just know the sounds of the words and that it's a prayer, but they don't actually know what they're saying. This is sort of standard Western Judaism. Okay, so getting that out of the way. Well, okay, let's be thorough. So as far as what I would consider to be non-religious sects of Judaism, there are the Reform Jews, which are, I mean, basically non-practicing Jews. They have Reform synagogues where they pray in English, which is actually in a way better if you don't speak Hebrew, so you actually know what you're saying. And it's very progressive. It's very egalitarian. Often they'll have female rabbis. Often they'll, be accepting to, gay, transgender, etc. They deviate quite a bit from what's written in the books, and it's mostly a cultural thing. It's for people that want to live in a secular society and really not have Judaism play a role in their life whatsoever. Although they will all say that they're Jewish and they're proud to be Jewish, and that's like a key part of their identity. That's what they'll say. There's also the Reconstructionist Jews, which I would say are more or less on par with Reform Jews. That's a movement I don't know as much about. It's more recent, and I think it's very progressive as well, and perhaps more radical than Reform. I mean, I think there's actually somewhat more involved in Reconstructionism, but I think it deviates further from Torah. Then there's conservative Jews, and this is how I was raised. Conservative and Reform are more or less the same thing if you're looking at it, if you're also bringing Orthodox into the picture. So when comparing them to each other, conservative Jews see themselves as quite different from Reform Jews, but I think Orthodox Jews don't see much of a difference between the two, if that makes sense. It's like, I should learn to just stop making metaphors because people never understand them. But it's like if you're, it's like the difference between being like a C-list or a B-list actor. Maybe a B-lister feels like they're a big deal because they're not a C-lister, but if you're an A-list actor, then there's not much of a difference between being B or C. Something like this. Anyways, so conservative Jews, they will pray in Hebrew, but they usually don't speak Hebrew. Go to shul, go to synagogue. Sometimes we'll go, I don't know how frequently Reform Jews go to shul. I imagine conservative Jews maybe go more often. The services tend to be a little bit longer, and some of them, will just observe things here and there, follow laws outside, like keeping kosher is one of these ones that conservative Jews will follow sometimes, although they often don't do it really to the letter, so they'll, maybe they won't eat pork or seafood, but they'll eat meat and dairy together, which you're not supposed to do. Or they'll, they won't wait too long between eating meat and dairy. and they may not drive on the Sabbath, but they may use light switches, they may rip things, they may hold things. So there's there's hundreds of laws, and conservative Jews, maybe follow like 9 or 10 of them. And there's obviously a huge range, but huge, but still extremely limited as far as getting into actual religious Judaism, which is what I really want to talk about. So now that we've accounted for 90% of Jews, if not more, those that actually follow the faith, they're broken up into many, many, many different groups. The biggest one, how do I want to break this down? So maybe it's best to go historically. Historically, Judaism was sort of similar to Christianity in that the Torah was sort of reserved for the rabbis, which are like the priests, and it was only, those at the top that really read it. And then it was sort of given to the people, like when the Bible was given to the people, it was a similar type of thing. And from this, there were various movements in Judaism throughout history that I'm not totally familiar with, that sort of interpreted the Torah in different ways. And at a certain point, it was written down, and then their rabbis began interpreting it. This is grossly butchering the story, but basically, there are these long, long books that are interpretations of the Holy Book. And these interpretations are written by rabbis. They're not written by God. And they're not holy. But these really are the ones that religious folk will study. So, if that makes sense, it's not that Jews are out there reading their holy book. They do read it, but there's been a tradition over, hundreds, if not up to 1,000 years now, perhaps more, that they've been writing down interpretations of Jewish law and of Jewish stories. And this is what is studied. So it's not that Jews today are trying to, study the Torah themselves so much as they are studying it through the lens of the great rabbis that have studied it already. So some of you might be familiar with the Kabbalah movement, which is, was like Madonna was very involved in this, and this is sort of like, I think in popular culture, seen as a, Jewish mysticism, which it is. It deals a lot with like numerology and things with like counting the amount of times letters are used in different passages, and every like letter is associated with a number. So it's like A is 1 and B is 2. I mean, it's Hebrew letters, but it's that but with Hebrew letters. And then, there's different significances to numbers, and they'll add up the amount of numbers in a word and then say that this has a certain meaning. And it's given this reputation as this sort of like hocus pocus kind of like, bastardization of the religion. But this is actually the book of Kabbalah, the Zohar, I believe it's called, is actually one of the main texts studied by the most religious Jews. So there's, I guess, some misinformation about that. you actually see there's actually a lot of things when you get into the very religious Jews that are quite different from non-religious Jews, and perhaps would be seen as a not religious thing. Um, so, for example, well, you see, I'm jumping around too much here. There's so many things to talk about, it's hard to kind of keep it straight. Anyways, the main of the religious Jews today, there's the modern Orthodoxy movement, which is essentially following, it is studying and following Torah very deeply, but it is also in a way secularized. I mean, modern Orthodox Jews will still dress like regular people, and they, they'll marry other modern Orthodox Jews, but they won't. I mean, there's more intermingling, I guess, of them and the rest of society, is how I would put it. They're still very religious, but they're involved in secular life. And then there's the different types of Orthodox Jews, which are considered Hasidim, or Hasidic Jews. And these are the Jews you see with the hats and the long beards and long sideburns and the fringes coming out. And this movement of Hasidim is something that grew out of Eastern Europe around the 18th century, 19th century, and the 1800s. And there were different rebbes, which are sort of like popes, I guess you could say. I mean, they were sort of like central figures for the different areas where they were living. And it was a movement of, extreme religiosity, or extreme from a secular standpoint. I mean, for them it's just, following the Torah, but it's seen as fundamentalism, I guess. And there's many different Hasidic movements. The biggest one by far is the Lubavitcher movement, which came out of Lubavitch, which is probably a city in Russia or something. And this is also known as Chabad. And I guess just to talk a little bit about them, so some Chabad Jews actually believe that, how do I talk about this? So there's the original Rebbe that started the Lubavitcher movement, but there have been many Rebbes, because it's been around for hundreds of years. And there was one that was alive somewhat recently, and his name was Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson, and he's actually believed to be the Messiah by many Chabad Jews. And this poses this is something that would be seen as completely sacrilegious to a non-religious Jew, because like one of the defining things of Judaism is, rejecting Christ as being the Messiah. Jews acknowledge Christ's existence as a great person, but they don't accept Christ as Messiah. So to accept a man as Messiah is something that, like, I don't think any Reform or conservative Jew can really wrap their head around. Another thing about Chabad Jews is that they believe that God is present in the world today in the same way in which he was in the stories of the Bible. So that's another thing where I think it's a little bit more subtle, but I think most non-religious Jews sort of have this understanding that God, created the world. I mean, there's a lot of atheist Jews out there too, but that, you know, what we're supposed to believe is that God created the universe, and then sort of had a lighter hand in some matters throughout the stories of the Bible. He speaks with Moses, and he speaks with Abraham, and he causes the flood in the Noah story. And so there's some works of God, but then in modern day people sort of see God as like existing kind of, yeah, God exists, but God isn't like here, like people see that people say that God is everywhere, but they won't really say that God is like, that we're still in like a biblical period, I guess. And that's sort of what Chabad Jews believe, is that it's like we haven't really exited this period of, really Garden of Eden, period of like this level of God's presence, of the spirit world basically existing in this world, which is, I think seen by many as like a very like new age sort of philosophy. Like it's a very like ayahuasca sounding kind of thing. So yeah, they sort of believe the spirit realm is present. They believe that the Messiah came, and they follow Kabbalah. So it's kind of like, when I first learned this, it was so shocking to me, because I always, considered, in my head, I thought, these, Hasidic Jews, I thought that they're just, studying Torah, and following all the rules, and that's what it is. But it's a lot about mysticism. It's a lot about asking questions. It's a deeply spiritual and really kind of out there thing. And this is like the highest level of Jewish religiosity. I mean, this is like, there aren't really forms of Judaism that were before the 1800s that still really prevail today. I mean, in that other video, he mentions the Yazidi Jews, I think. I'm not sure if he does. I mean, there's a few other like, Mizrahi groups that there actually is one that sort of tries to follow Torah to the letter of the law, like what I thought Hasids do. But I mean, like without using other books. But yeah, Hasids are interesting, and so the other signifying thing about Chabad movement is their whole philosophy is spreading Judaism. So actually, when they're the biggest Hasidic movement, but they're actually seen as being progressive by the other Hasidic movements, because in Chabad, they have a lot of money, because they get a lot of donations from conservative Jews and Reform Jews. They donate to Chabad, and Chabad has centers all over the world where you can go and you can pray there and you can have dinner with them, and they're open to everyone. I mean, all Jews. I mean, but I feel like if you brought a non-Jew there, they wouldn't like kick you out, They're very welcoming at Chabad. And like I said, they're all over the world. They have a ton of money from donations. And so they're actually seen as a little bit, liberal by the other Hasid movements, who are, strictly, basically just interacting with other Hasidic Jews. It's sort of an isolationist thing, just because the religion is so demanding and sort of doesn't really allow for much, integration with secular life. Um, in Israel, I don't know if this is still the case, but it used to be that the government actually supported the ultra-Orthodox community. I just call it Orthodox. They call it ultra-Orthodox. I just call it, Orthodoxy. That they, the government actually supported, people that go to yeshiva, which is like a school to study this kind of stuff, and to study Torah and study these other books, and just to pray and study, that they're actually supported by the government, which is amazing, and obviously is met with a lot of differing opinions, and what else to be said? There's so many other things to say, but I'm trying to follow this in a way where it makes some sense. So of the ball busting videos you can find online, you'll find that they're sort of broken. The categories that you'd find is there's like, as far as how they're shot, you'll have POV, you'll have ones where it's sort of like a wide angle, you'll have multicam ones, and then you'll have like kind of like close up, like kind of amateur shot ones, with just like a still camera that's just like set down, and you'll find ones that like focus on like the different types of like hits. So you'll have punching, kicking, biting, flicking, slapping, stomping, butt bombing, squeezing, and then using various torture devices. So you'll have, vices and shock collars, whips, canes, bats, anything else. In trample videos, you'll sometimes have the guy is lying down and he has his penis and testicles put through a little hole on a board where a woman will stand on them, sometimes with heels, sometimes jumping, and combined with some kicking. And sometimes in the videos he'll come, sometimes, and in general, sometimes there'll be milking, there'll be denied orgasm where he's brought close and then not allowed to come. Sometimes it'll just develop into, a regular blowjob or a hand job, and he'll come. Sometimes it'll mix in various types of humiliation, small penis humiliation, just degrading stuff, spitting, human ashtray, financial domination, simulated, and sometimes he'll have his face exposed, sometimes he'll be wearing a GIMP mask or some other type of mask, sometimes he'll be, restricted, a girl will be holding him while another girl kicks or knees him, and often they vary the types of hits in a video. And it's usually focused on kicking. Kicking is what you'll find the most of, kicks and knees. And then I guess punches would come next, but it's very rare to find videos that are just punching. You'll have some where it's one guy, one girl. You'll have some where it's multiple girls and a guy. You'll have some where it's multiple guys and a girl. You'll have cunt busting, guy busting, and sometimes you'll have videos where it's more mixed wrestling, and there'll just be a couple busts in the video, so it's not strictly a ball busting video per se. Face sitting that sometimes involves a little bit of busting in it. Um, uh, a lot of them are CFNM, clothed female, nude male. A lot of what you'll have uploaded are movie busts, so people will upload scenes from movies where there's busts. You'll have a JOI, jerk-off instruction that involves busting, also self-busting, and sometimes it'll have a CEI, cum eating instruction with busting. And you'll have these amateur videos. You'll have various femdom studios that release ball busting clips, so they'll do a variety of bondage and different types of cock and ball torture and different types of female domination, face sitting, and orgasm denial, and then they'll also release ball busting clips. Sometimes there'll be ball busting studios, sometimes where it's one guy that runs the studio and he'll be the main actor and he'll have various different models come on, sometimes famous vanilla porn models or sometimes just models that do fetish work, and sometimes there will be a female-run studio where it's one woman that's doing all of the busting and having various guys on. And these women will often also have an OnlyFans account or do some doming on Twitter, maybe financial domination, or guys will be able to order custom clips is another big thing. And you'll see a big there's a big variety in length. Sometimes you'll have videos that's just a few seconds of a single bust, up to over a half hour of sort of more lengthy scenes with dialogue and various busts happening. The biggest studios right now, I would say, are probably Jasmine Mendez, her studio, where she does a fair amount of ball busting. American Mean Girls, formerly Miami Mean Girls, does a lot of busting. Bratty Foot Girls. There's another one with a similar name that I get confused with. I'm sorry if I'm forgetting them. Quebra-Nozes is a big one out of Brazil. That's also uploaded under Brazilian Ball Busting Women, I think, is a name they've used before, or Brazilian Ball Busters. Eric Jover does one. It's called, was it First Porn Stars Ball Busting or something like this? First time ball busting? I'm not sure. A lot of the videos are titled First Time Ball Busting, but I think it's called Porn Stars Ball. He's had a lot of famous people on. There's a clip with Brie Olson he did. Lance Hart is another big one. Of Perv Out Studios, he also has a business where he helps producers start their own studios, and he takes a cut. And fascinating guy. Ball Bust and Foot Lovin' is another big one, Brian Baldacious's studio. And Bo Ballistic he's a really big actor. He's shot for Brian before, but he doesn't have his own studio, I don't believe. He's more of just an actor. You know, the biggest male actors are probably him, Crudelis Amateur, I'm not sure how to pronounce him. He has his own studio, Comedia Productions. So him, Brian, Bo, Lance, the Quebra-Nozes guy. Those are probably the biggest men. Then there's also a studio, Kelly Will Bust Your Balls. She put out a lot of work, and it was all almost, I mean, 99%, 99.9% ball busting clips that she released. But she hasn't made anything for 4 years or so. Or there was actually one clip that came out a couple years ago, but she's been basically done. Um, uh, Skylar Renee is another big model that does this. Also, Jolene Hex, also known as Jolene the Valkyrie. Uh, and these girls will also do sessions. So you could book a session with them. I mean, Jasmine Mendez as well. They travel, and you can. I mean, they all have different things they do, but they'll often offer ball busting, mixed wrestling. No sex, obviously, but things like this, and you can pay to meet them and have a session with them. Um, there's also a number of studios in Britain. Ball Busting World is a big one, and Mistress T does some ball busting videos. She has her own studio, and she's shot for Ball Busting World as well. Nikki Whiplash has done a lot of Ball Busting World videos. I guess the guy that is in a lot of Ball Busting World videos is also one of the guys that you'll see the most, that's put out the most work. What else was I going to say? You'll see also some animated ball busting, some sort of like animated stuff geared towards furry or vor, some like 3D stuff. I've seen some tentacle porn type ball busting, some like alien stuff. You also have tons of images where people will take a picture of a woman, sometimes a celebrity, sometimes just an attractive woman, and put text over it, saying things about how I'm gonna crunch your balls, etc. To look like it's a quote that they're saying this. And a lot of hentai of ball busting, sometimes with animals, sometimes with people. Then getting into, I guess, the more intense forms, you'll see saline injections where the balls are, injected with saline so they get really big and really tender, and then that'll be followed by punching or stomping, standing on them. And you'll also find stuff where there is blood, from kicking with spiked shoes or just kicking a lot with heels, trampling, and yeah, some even darker stuff. I've never seen an actual castration video, but there's a lot of castration threat hand jobs and castration threat stuff. I've seen videos they use like stinging nettles sometimes, and what else is used? Riding crops, of course. I'm trying to think what else draws blood. I've definitely come across more of these darker videos, but I guess I've blanked it out. Sometimes you'll have the video will be, the plot will sort of center around a kind the man is assaulting the woman, so this is self-defense gone rogue, sort of. Sometimes it is a cheating boyfriend that's getting this punishment. Sometimes it's simply a guy. Sometimes it's a slave that's collared and is brought out of a cage and then busted. Sometimes it's like a fan that wants to meet them and then is getting busted. A man that, wants sex, is like expecting to have sex with the woman and instead getting busted. Sometimes it's a friend, sometimes it's a brother, stepbrother, uh, stepfather even. Um, and often another big studio is Cat BB Savers, where this guy shoots with his girlfriend. A lot of the amateur videos are sort of couples busting. Sometimes it's in a actual like karate theme where they'll be like in a class. Um, her outfits will the outfits of the girl will sort of range from a just dressed casually to dressed very sexy, bra and pantyhose, to being naked, um, being in a bikini potentially, or being in leather, being in sort of like S&M, BDSM type garb. Um, you'll also see other videos where there's a dynamic of cuckolding. So it's the cuck is, I mean, the woman is sucking off a bull, and then the man is sucking him off, and then the man is getting busted by the woman. Man is even getting busted by the man, I presume. And then sometimes there's pegging involved. The woman is pegging the man, busting, pegging. Um, I've seen videos even where there's a female slave as well. So there will be the the women are, maybe two or three women are taking turns kicking a guy in the nuts, and then they also have a girl there who's on a leash and is maybe, licking out of a dog bowl, and is just present there as well. Sometimes it's more of a like prisoner type vibe where the men are, chained and all, their faces are obscured, and the woman takes turns, kicking all of them in the nuts. Sometimes it's like punishment for him having too small of a penis or not being able to please her sexually. So the busting is, she's mad at him and thus busting him. Um, and the woman's behavior, her reactions, it ranges from her being sexually turned on by this. Sometimes it's a face-sitting video where she's having her clitoris stimulated by him, and then is also punching him in the nuts, and is even like having an orgasm. And then sometimes she's more or less apathetic about it, to the point of being very angry and yelling and commanding him, uh, which yeah. Uh, just as an aside, I don't really like that, because I feel like if she is is dominant, she shouldn't be needing to yell at him in order to have him do. Which, anyways, um, uh, what else? The man's reactions. Sometimes the man will be, worshiping the woman, speaking with her. Sometimes the man will be totally sort of dehumanized, won't be able to speak at all, will be gagged, um, and sometimes the man will, scream in pain, and the woman will sometimes laugh in response to that, or in response to him falling over. Uh, they tend to end with him on the ground and maybe a little dialogue and the woman walking off, depending on the type of video. They often just tend to cut off at a certain point. Um, the man is also potentially in chastity, and they're filmed sometimes on a set, sometimes just in someone's bedroom or living room. Sometimes they're filmed outside in the yard. There's another really big studio called Serial Ballbusters, where um, they're sort of, out, like at a restaurant or something, or out at the beach. And these are all European women, I've seen. Um, or they're out hiking even, I've seen this. And there was something else I was about to say. Serial book. Oh, there's also this studio that's popped up called Punch in the Nuts, something like this. And they always they always caption their videos as being comedy, and they post a lot of clips on YouTube. And it seems like they're just really trying to get out of some like porn law or something like that, by calling it comedy. It's really goofy. Also, a lot of them are fake. So you'll see Dante, who's also a guy that's been in a lot of videos, some real videos, but also some fake ones where there will be sort of like sound effects, and it's obviously that they're not actually kicking or hitting them. Most of them are real, and you can tell because his balls are exposed. So that's another thing. Sometimes he's wearing pants, sometimes boxers, sometimes they're completely exposed, and sometimes he'll have to take off clothes progressively over the course of the video. I'm remembering now there's actually another man who is in many videos, and I'm not sure of his name. He's more of a middle-aged man. He's sort of a shorter fellow. I believe he's shot with Nikki Whiplash before, and Mistress T as well. And it's another studio that he works for, but I'm blanking on what it's called. And sometimes the scene will be centered around him not being able to come, like not being allowed to come, and then him getting busted as punishment for coming. It's another thing we'll see. And yeah. Um, yeah.